He installed security systems to protect families from monsters. He was a church council president, a Boy Scout leader, a husband, a father. But for 31 years, Dennis Rader lived the most chilling double life in American criminal history. He bound them. He tortured them. He killed them. And then he went home, kissed his wife, and helped his daughter with her homework. This is the story of BTK, the killer who hid in the place we'd least expect to find evil, right next door. Before we dive into one of the most disturbing cases in true crime history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. And if this story sends chills down your spine, smash that like button. Now, let's begin. January 15, 1974. Wichita, Kansas. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and cold. The Otero family was just beginning their day like any other American family in the heartland. Joseph Otero, a 38-year-old Air Force veteran, had recently moved his family to Wichita for a fresh start. His wife, Julie, was 34. Their 4 children ranged from 9 to 15 years old. They had no idea that someone had been watching them, studying them, planning. At approximately 7:30 a.m., there was a knock at the door of 803 North Edgemore Street. When Julie Otero opened it, she saw a man, average height, glasses, unremarkable in every way. He told her he was having car trouble and needed to call for help. It was 1974. There were no cell phones. Helping a stranded motorist was just what neighbors did. What good people did. Julie let him inside. Within minutes, Dennis Rader had pulled a gun. He told the family he was a wanted fugitive on the run, that he needed their car and money, and that if they cooperated, nobody would get hurt. It was all a lie. He had no intention of just robbing them. He had come there for one reason only, to fulfill a fantasy he'd been nurturing for years. What happened next in that house would haunt Wichita for 3 decades. But here's what makes this even more terrifying. At that very moment, Rader's co-workers at Coleman Company thought he was just late for his shift. His wife thought he was at work. Nobody suspected that the polite, quiet man they knew was capable of what he was about to do. Joseph Otero tried to fight back. He was a trained military man, strong and protective of his family. But Rader had the advantage of surprise and a weapon. He forced the entire family into the bedroom at gunpoint. He tied them up, Joseph, Julie, and 2 of their younger children, Josephine, 11, and Joseph Jr., 9. The older children, Charlie, 15, and Danny, 14, were at school. They would be the ones to discover the horror later. Rader used the same knots he'd learned in the Boy Scouts. The same knots he would later teach children as a scout leader. Think about that for a moment. He strangled Joseph first, using a rope. Then Julie. Then young Joseph Jr. But Josephine, 11-year-old Josephine, he took to the basement. What he did to her was so depraved that even hardened homicide detectives who saw the crime scene would require counseling. When he was finally done, he hanged her from a pipe. Before leaving, Rader took jewelry and a radio, not because he needed them, but as trophies. Souvenirs to relive the experience later. Then he simply walked out the front door, got in his car, and drove away. Nobody saw anything suspicious. Nobody suspected the man leaving that house had just murdered an entire family. When Charlie Otero came home from school that afternoon and found his family's bodies, his screams could be heard throughout the neighborhood. Wichita was a quiet, peaceful city in the heart of America. This kind of violence didn't happen there. The brutality of the murders shocked even experienced investigators. There was no forced entry. Nothing stolen of significant value. No obvious motive. The level of planning and the sexual nature of some of the violence suggested something terrifying. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was someone who killed because he wanted to. Because he enjoyed it. And the most chilling part? The police had no suspects. No witnesses. No leads. For 3 months, Wichita held its collective breath. People installed new locks. Bought guns. Stopped trusting strangers. And then, on April 4, 1974, he struck again. But this time, he didn't just kill. He did something that would define his entire criminal career, something that would eventually lead to his downfall 30 years later. He made contact. Catherine Bright, 21 years old, came home from work on April 4 with her brother Kevin. They had no idea someone was already inside, waiting. Rader forced them at gunpoint into a bedroom. He tied up Kevin first, but Kevin, showing incredible courage, fought back. In the struggle, Rader shot him twice. Kevin, despite his injuries, managed to escape and run for help. But he couldn't save his sister. While Kevin fled, Rader turned his rage on Catherine. He stabbed her multiple times. She fought desperately for her life, struggling so hard that Rader later admitted she almost overpowered him. But eventually, she succumbed to her wounds. Rader fled before police arrived, frustrated that his victim had fought back, angry that a witness had escaped. Kevin Bright survived, but the trauma of that day would haunt him forever. He could only provide a basic description of the killer: medium build, dark hair, glasses. It could have been thousands of men in Wichita. Then, on October 22, 1974, a phone call came to the Wichita Eagle newspaper. A male voice, calm and measured, told the reporter to check a specific book at the Wichita Public Library. When investigators rushed to the library, they found it, a letter hidden in an engineering textbook. The letter was typed, detailed, and chilling. In it, the killer took credit for the Otero murders. He described details only the killer could know. And he gave himself a name: BTK. Bind. Torture. Kill. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them, BTK, he wrote. He explained that he had a monster inside him and that he needed to kill. He compared himself to other serial killers like Son of Sam and Jack the Ripper. Most disturbingly, he wrote, "Maybe you can stop me. I can't stop myself." This wasn't a criminal trying to evade capture. This was someone who wanted recognition. Fame. He wanted the world to know what he had done. He wanted credit for his work. The letter terrified Wichita. A serial killer was not only hunting in their city, he was taunting them. For the next 3 years, BTK seemed to vanish. There were no more murders that fit his pattern. No more letters. Wichita began to wonder, had he moved away? Been arrested for something else? Died? But Dennis Rader hadn't gone anywhere. He was still in Wichita. Still living his double life. Still fantasizing. During this time, Rader got married. His name was Paula Dietz, and by all accounts, she was a devoted, kind woman who had no idea who she had married. They would go on to have 2 children, a son and a daughter. Rader worked for ADT Security Services, installing alarm systems in people's homes. Think about that irony. People invited him into their homes to protect them from criminals, never knowing they were letting a monster across their threshold. Neighbors described him as helpful, if a bit odd. He mowed his lawn meticulously. Attended church regularly. Volunteered with the Boy Scouts. He was invisible in his normalcy. But in 1977, the monster inside Dennis Rader couldn't stay dormant any longer. And when he struck next, he chose a location that proved just how bold and calculating he truly was. On March 17, 1977, Shirley Vian was home sick with the flu, caring for her 3 young children. There was a knock at the door. When she answered, Rader forced his way inside, showing her a gun and a badge, which was fake. He told her he was a detective looking for a fugitive in the neighborhood. Shirley, concerned for her children's safety, complied. Rader locked her 3 children in the bathroom, telling them their mother would be fine if they stayed quiet. Then he tied up Shirley in her bedroom. Shirley begged for her life. She was a mother. Her children needed her. Please. Rader strangled her with a rope while her children, aged 8, 5, and 1, waited in the bathroom, unaware that their mother was being murdered just feet away. After Shirley was dead, Rader calmly let the children out of the bathroom, told them their mother was sleeping and would be fine, and left. Those children would find their mother's body shortly after. Just 3 months later, on December 8, 1977, Rader broke into the home of Nancy Fox, a 25-year-old woman who lived alone. He waited for her to come home from work. When she arrived just after midnight, he was already inside. Nancy tried to reason with him. She offered him money, anything he wanted. But Rader didn't want money. He made her undress, tied her up with pantyhose and scarves, and strangled her. After she was dead, he posed her body and took photographs, more trophies for his collection. But Nancy Fox's murder would be different from the others. This time, Rader made a crucial mistake that would give investigators critical evidence decades later. After killing Nancy, Rader called the police himself. In a calm, almost monotone voice, he reported a homicide at Nancy's address and provided her phone number. Then he hung up. Investigators rushed to the scene and found Nancy's body. The brazenness shocked everyone. BTK had literally called in his own crime. It was as if he was daring police to catch him. After Nancy Fox's murder, BTK began communicating more frequently. He sent a poem to the Wichita Eagle about Shirley Vian. He sent letters with details about his crimes. He suggested names for himself and seemed offended when media coverage wasn't extensive enough. This wasn't just about killing anymore. It was about attention, recognition, control. In 1978, he sent a letter suggesting possible suspects, none of whom were him, of course. He included a drawing of what he called his hit kit, the bag he carried with rope, tape, handcuffs, and other instruments of torture. He was literally showing investigators his tools, confident they couldn't catch him. And he was right. Despite the letters, the phone calls, the witnesses who had seen him, investigators couldn't identify BTK. He was too careful. Too organized. He left minimal physical evidence, and what he did leave, in the days before DNA databases, wasn't enough to identify him. In 1979, Rader attempted to kill Anna Williams. He broke into her house and waited for hours, but she never came home. She'd decided to stay elsewhere that night. Frustrated, Rader left but later sent Anna a poem describing what he had planned to do to her. Imagine receiving a letter detailing how a serial killer had waited in your home to murder you. And then, just as suddenly as he had emerged, BTK went silent. Completely silent. For 25 years, there were no more confirmed BTK murders. No letters. No calls. Nothing. It was as if he had disappeared from the earth. But here's what's truly disturbing: Dennis Rader didn't stop being Dennis Rader. He just stopped killing. Or did he? During BTK's long silence, Dennis Rader's life appeared completely normal. He left ADT Security and in 1991 became a compliance officer for Park City, a suburb of Wichita. His job involved enforcing city ordinances, zoning violations, animal control, overgrown lawns. Neighbors both feared and mocked him because he was strict, sometimes petty, often confrontational. He would measure grass height with a ruler and issue citations for the most minor infractions. He took his authority seriously, too seriously. He seemed to relish the small power it gave him over others. He was also deeply involved in his church, Christ Lutheran Church, where he served as president of the Congregation Council. He ushered at services. He attended every meeting. People trusted him with their spiritual community. His children grew up. His daughter went to college. His son started his own life. Paula worked and maintained their home. To everyone who knew the Rader family, they seemed ordinary. Boring, even. But in Dennis Rader's private world, the monster never left. He kept meticulous records of his crimes in a hidden location. He had photographs of his victims, their belongings, detailed journals describing every moment of their murders. He had drawings and sketches of future victims, bondage positions, and torture scenarios. He would take these items out periodically and relive his crimes. This practice, which he later called trolling, kept his fantasies alive. Investigators never stopped looking for BTK. The case remained open, and every few years, there would be renewed public interest. But with no new crimes, no new evidence, and no DNA matches in the database, the trail was ice cold. Many in law enforcement believed BTK was either dead, in prison for another crime, or had moved far away. They were wrong on all counts. In March 2004, the Wichita Eagle ran a story commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders. The article questioned whether BTK was still alive and speculated about who he might have been. Dennis Rader read that article. And it made him angry. After 25 years of silence, BTK had been largely forgotten. New generations of Wichita residents didn't even know who he was. The article treated him like ancient history, like he hadn't been real, like his work didn't matter anymore. His ego couldn't tolerate it. On March 19, 2004, a manila envelope was left in a drop box outside the Wichita Eagle offices. Inside were photographs and a driver's license. The license belonged to Vicki Wegerle, a 28-year-old woman who had been murdered in her home in 1986. At the time, her death hadn't been connected to BTK. Investigators thought it might have been committed by her husband. But now, 18 years later, BTK was claiming credit for it. The photographs showed Vicky's body in various positions after death. They had clearly been taken by the killer. BTK was back. And he was ready to play again. What BTK didn't realize was that the world had changed dramatically in 25 years. Technology had evolved. The police had new tools at their disposal. And BTK's arrogance, his absolute certainty that he was smarter than everyone else, would finally become his downfall. Over the next 11 months, BTK sent multiple communications to the media and police. He sent word puzzles. He sent packages with dolls bound in ways that mimicked his victims. He sent jewelry taken from crime scenes. He was playing an elaborate game, convinced he was in complete control. Investigators, led by Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, responded carefully. They knew they were dealing with a narcissist who craved attention and validation. They began communicating back through newspaper ads and press conferences, feeding his ego while carefully trying to coax him into making a mistake. In January 2005, BTK sent a communication asking if police could trace a floppy disk if he sent one. In a press conference, Lieutenant Landwehr publicly answered, no. It was a lie. But BTK believed it. On February 16, 2005, a purple floppy disk was found in the parking lot of a Home Depot. It had been placed inside a cereal box and left in the bed of a pickup truck. On the disk was a deleted Microsoft Word document. When forensic analysts recovered the deleted file's metadata, they found something remarkable. The document had last been modified by someone named Dennis at an organization called Christ Lutheran Church. After 31 years, thousands of investigative hours, and millions of dollars spent, BTK's identity came down to metadata on a floppy disk. Investigators quickly searched for any Dennis connected to Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. There was only one, Dennis Rader, 59 years old, compliance officer for Park City, church council president, married father of two. They pulled his Park City employee records and found a tissue sample he provided for a city health screening. They also located a medical file that included his daughter's DNA from a previous Pap smear at a university health center. Forensic analysts compared the DNA from several BTK crime scenes with DNA that would be expected from the father of Rader's daughter. It was a match. The probability was astronomical. They had their killer. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was pulled over while driving in Park City. Multiple police vehicles surrounded him. He was confused at first, asking what he'd done wrong, if there was a problem with his license. Then they said the words that ended his 3-decade reign of terror: "Mr. Rader, you are under arrest for multiple counts of first-degree murder." According to witnesses, Rader's face went completely blank. No surprise. No denial. No anger. Just nothing. He later said he was wondering in that moment whether they had enough evidence to convict him. When investigators searched Rader's home, they found his entire collection: photographs of victims, jewelry, sketches, detailed journals, newspaper clippings about himself, and even his handmade BTK badges. It was all there, hidden in his office, in his garage, in storage spaces, an elaborate archive of evil that he'd been maintaining for over 3 decades. Paula Rader was at work when her husband was arrested. She came home to find police searching her house, news helicopters overhead, reporters swarming her street. She had absolutely no idea. Their children had no idea. His colleagues, his church members, his neighbors, none of them had any clue. The man who had installed their security systems, who had cited them for unkempt lawns, who had passed the offering plate at church, that man had murdered 10 people. But here's what might be the most chilling part of this entire story: when Dennis Rader confessed, he showed no remorse. No emotion. No humanity. He described his crimes like someone discussing a hobby. And what he revealed about his methodology, his selection process, and his daily life would shock even the investigators who had spent decades hunting him. Dennis Rader didn't just confess to his crimes, he relished the opportunity to finally discuss them openly. After 30 years of living a double life, he could finally talk about his projects without hiding. During his interrogation and later in court, Rader displayed a chilling detachment. He had given each potential victim a project number. He kept detailed timelines. He described his murders using passive, clinical language that stripped away all humanity from his victims. He referred to the act of strangling someone as putting them down. When asked about his victims' suffering, Rader seemed annoyed by the question. He explained that he had developed his technique to be efficient. He talked about different types of knots and which worked best. He discussed the pros and cons of various ligatures. It was like listening to someone explain a technical skill. Most disturbingly, Rader revealed that the Otero murders hadn't been his first attempt at killing. He had stalked other potential victims before the Oteros, but circumstances hadn't been right. He had broken into homes and waited for people who never came. He had followed women for weeks, learning their routines. The Otero murders weren't an impulsive act, they were the culmination of years of fantasy and failed attempts. Rader also confessed to the 1991 murder of Dolores Davis, a 62-year-old woman who lived alone. He had strangled her in her home, then dumped her body under a bridge. That brought his confirmed victim count to 10 people: Joseph Otero, 38, Julie Otero, 34, Joseph Otero Jr., 9, Josephine Otero, 11, Catherine Bright, 21, Shirley Vian, 24, Nancy Fox, 25, Maureen Hedge, 53, Vicky Wegerle, 28, and Dolores Davis, 62. 10 human beings with families, dreams, futures, all erased so Dennis Rader could satisfy his fantasies. Investigators believe there may have been more victims during BTK's long silence, cases that were never connected to him. Rader has hinted at other crimes but has never provided details. To this day, some in law enforcement believe he killed more than 10 people. What makes someone like Dennis Rader? Psychologists and criminal profilers have studied Rader extensively because he represents one of the most successful compartmentalization of a double life in criminal history. How did he maintain a normal family life while simultaneously being an active serial killer? How did nobody close to him suspect anything? Rader displayed classic characteristics of a sexual sadist and narcissistic personality. He was aroused by his victims' suffering and fear. He needed to be in complete control. He kept trophies not just as mementos but to fuel future fantasies and to relive the sense of power he felt during the murders. But he also showed remarkable impulse control, rare among serial killers. He could stop killing for years at a time, channeling his urges into his fantasy life. He used pornography, bondage materials, and his collection of victim items to satisfy his compulsions without actually killing. His need for recognition, however, was ultimately his weakness. Rader wasn't content being an anonymous killer. He needed the world to know how clever he was, how successful his crimes had been, how he had evaded capture for decades. That narcissism, that desperate need to be recognized, is what brought him down. When asked why he trusted the police when they said a floppy disk couldn't be traced, Rader gave a chilling answer: I had to trust them. I couldn't accomplish my goal otherwise. His goal wasn't to avoid capture, not really. His goal was to communicate, to be acknowledged, to cement his place in criminal history. In his twisted mind, getting caught was an acceptable outcome as long as he got credit for his crimes. The most disturbing question remains: how did Paula Rader, his wife of 34 years, not know? How did his children not see any signs? The answer reveals something terrifying about the nature of evil and how it can hide among us. Paula Rader has spoken only briefly about her life with Dennis. By all accounts, their marriage was conventional and unremarkable. Dennis was strict, sometimes controlling, but not abusive. He worked, came home, had dinner with the family. He was involved with the children's activities. He attended church. He seemed like millions of other middle American husbands and fathers. Paula insisted, and most investigators believe her, that she had no idea. No suspicions. No red flags. How is that possible? The truth is that Dennis Rader was a compartmentalization expert. He kept his fantasy life completely separate from his family life. He had hidden locations for his murder mementos. He scheduled his stalking activities during work hours or when he had legitimate reasons to be away from home. He never brought his darkness home. Moreover, Rader genuinely seemed to care for his family in his own way. He wanted to be seen as a good father and husband. That was part of his mask, the ultimate camouflage. Who would suspect the devoted family man? After his arrest, Paula divorced him immediately. His children cut all contact. They were victims too, victims of betrayal, of deception, of having their entire lives revealed as a lie. Imagine learning that your father, the man who raised you, taught you right from wrong, took you to church every Sunday. Imagine learning he was a monster who tortured and murdered innocent people. The psychological damage from that revelation is incalculable. Dennis Rader's trial was unlike most serial killer proceedings. There was no question of guilt. Rader had confessed and seemed almost eager to discuss his crimes. The trial became a forum for him to finally receive the recognition he'd craved for decades. On June 27, 2005, Rader appeared in court for his sentencing hearing. Kansas had temporarily abolished the death penalty in 1972 and didn't reinstate it until 1994, which meant Rader couldn't be executed for murders committed before that date. He would face life imprisonment instead. The hearing lasted 2 days and was broadcast nationally. Rader stood before the court and, in excruciating detail, described each murder. He spoke for hours, using a PowerPoint presentation he'd helped create, walking through his crimes methodically. He showed no remorse. No emotion. He occasionally became animated when discussing the clever aspects of his plans or frustrated when explaining things that hadn't gone as intended. He described human beings like they were objects. He reduced the worst moments of his victims' lives to technical procedures. The courtroom was filled with victims' family members. They had waited decades for answers, for justice, for closure. Now they had to sit and listen to this man, this smiling, calm, ordinary-looking man, describe in clinical detail how he murdered their loved ones. Charlie Otero, who had found his family's bodies at age 15, gave a victim impact statement. Now a man in his 40s, he looked Rader in the eye and told him about the nightmares, the PTSD, the decades of therapy, the way that January Day in 1974 had destroyed every sense of safety and innocence in his life. Kevin Bright, who had survived BTK's attack and lost his sister Catherine, spoke about survivor's guilt, about decades of wondering if he could have done more to save her. Other family members described lives permanently altered by grief and trauma. Children grew up without mothers. Parents buried children. Siblings lost their other halves. Rader listened with a blank expression, occasionally nodding as if acknowledging interesting points in a business meeting. Judge Gregory Waller sentenced Dennis Rader to 10 consecutive life sentences, 175 years minimum before possibility of parole. Given Rader's age, it was effectively a death sentence. He would die in prison. As Rader was led away, he reportedly smiled and waved at the cameras. Dennis Rader is currently incarcerated at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. He's in his late 70s now. He spends 23 hours a day in a single cell. He has no television, no internet, no contact with other inmates. He receives occasional letters from fans, disturbed individuals who write to serial killers, but most of his mail goes unanswered. In prison, Rader has occasionally granted interviews with journalists and psychologists. Even now, he shows no genuine remorse. He speaks about his victims in the same detached, clinical way. He seems most bothered not by his crimes but by how he was caught. He still believes the police lied to him about the floppy disk, and he considers that deception unfair. The BTK case revolutionized forensic investigation in several ways. It demonstrated the power of digital forensics and metadata analysis. It showed how DNA databases could solve cold cases decades old. It also highlighted the importance of psychological profiling in understanding how serial killers think and what might motivate them to break their silence. For Wichita, the BTK capture brought a complicated mix of relief and trauma. The nightmare was finally over, but its effects would last generations. Property values in neighborhoods where BTK killed remained depressed for years. Survivors and victims' families still struggle with PTSD. The collective sense of betrayal, that this monster had been living among them, serving them, protecting them in some cases, left deep psychological scars. The case also sparked important conversations about warning signs and the banality of evil. Dennis Rader wasn't a raving lunatic. He wasn't obviously crazy. He functioned in society, held jobs, maintained relationships. He looked like everyone else. That's perhaps the most terrifying lesson of the BTK case: evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like your neighbor. Your coworker. The person sitting next to you in church. But there's one more disturbing aspect of the BTK case that we haven't discussed yet, something that reveals just how close Rader came to never being caught, and how his capture might have prevented future murders. In the years since his capture, investigators have revisited unsolved murders in Kansas and neighboring states, looking for possible BTK connections. Several cases have concerning similarities: female victims strangled in their homes, minimal evidence left behind, no clear motive or connection to the killer. Rader has been questioned about these cases. He typically smiles, sometimes hints that there might be more to his story, but never provides definitive answers. It's one final way to maintain control, to keep people wondering, to remain relevant. Some investigators believe Rader's long silence from 1991 to 2004 doesn't mean he stopped killing, it might mean he simply got better at not taking credit. Could there be victims who were never attributed to BTK? There's also the question of why he stopped at all after 1991. Rader has said he channeled his urges into fantasy and his collection of trophies. But some psychologists question whether that's the complete truth. Sexual sadists typically escalate over time, they don't usually develop the self-control to simply stop. Another disturbing possibility was Rader planning to kill again before he was caught. When investigators searched his properties, they found several active projects, surveillance files on potential victims. He had photographs, addresses, daily routine information. He was stalking again. Whether he would have acted on these plans is unknown, but the evidence suggests he was building towards something. The Wichita community has worked to remember BTK's victims not as victims but as the full people they were before their lives were taken. Memorial scholarships have been established in their names. Their families have shared stories of who these people were, their dreams, their personalities, their legacies beyond the terrible way they died. Joseph Otero was a kind father who loved his family deeply. Julie Otero was devoted to her children. Josephine was a bright, happy little girl. Young Joseph loved baseball. Catherine Bright was starting her adult life with optimism and energy. Shirley Vian was a loving mother fighting through illness. Nancy Fox was independent and hardworking. Maureen Hedge was a grandmother. Vicki Wegerle was artistic and creative. Dolores Davis was a generous soul who helped her neighbors. These were real people with real lives. Not BTK victims. Not statistics. Not footnotes in a true crime story. They were human beings who deserved to live, to grow old, to pursue happiness. Dennis Rader stole that from them. He stole it from their families. He stole it from his own family. The BTK case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and evil. We want to believe that monsters are obvious, that we'd recognize them, that they'd stand out in a crowd. We want to think that evil has a face we'd recognize. But Dennis Rader proves that's not true. Evil can be ordinary. It can blend in. It can sit next to you in church, install your home security system, and help your child tie knots in the Boy Scouts. The case also reveals how narcissism and the need for recognition can override even a highly developed sense of self-preservation. Rader had successfully evaded capture for 3 decades. He could have remained free for the rest of his life. But his ego, his desperate need to be acknowledged, to be remembered, to be seen as important, drove him to resurface. He chose recognition over freedom. For the families of BTK's victims, there is no real closure. Their loved ones are still gone. The trauma still reverberates through generations. But at least they have answers. They know who took their family members and why. They know he'll never hurt anyone else. They know he'll die in prison. For Paula Rader and her children, the burden is different but equally heavy. They live with the knowledge that they shared a home with a serial killer. That they loved someone capable of such horror. That their entire family history is now permanently linked to some of the most heinous crimes in American history. The BTK case reminds us to trust our instincts, to pay attention to warning signs, to remember that people aren't always who they seem to be. But it also reminds us not to live in paranoia. Dennis Rader was an aberration, a rare combination of psychopathy, sadism, and the ability to compartmentalize that most people don't possess. Most of our neighbors are exactly who they appear to be. Most people who help us in distress are genuinely helpful. Most volunteers and community leaders are truly good people. But sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, the person nobody suspects is exactly the person we should be suspecting. Dennis Rader once said that he had a monster inside him that he couldn't control. But that was a lie, just another manipulation. He had complete control. He chose to plan. He chose to stalk. He chose to kill. He chose to take trophies. He chose to send letters. He chose to live a double life for 31 years. And when he finally chose to seek recognition, he chose his own downfall. Today, at El Dorado Correctional Facility, Dennis Rader sits alone in his cell. No family visits. No friends. No freedom. He has all the time in the world to reflect on his choices, but according to those who've interviewed him, he still doesn't reflect on the pain he caused, only on his own cleverness and his perceived legacy. But here's the truth that Rader will never accept: he's not clever. He's not special. He's not important. He's simply a sad, broken man who destroyed lives to feel powerful, who hurt innocent people because he was too weak to fight his own impulses, who craved attention because deep down he knew he was utterly ordinary. The real legacy of BTK isn't Dennis Rader's name, it's the names of his victims and the strength of those who survived him. If this story affected you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell. We dive deep into the psychology of true crime cases every week, always remembering the victims first and foremost. Drop a comment below. Did you know about the BTK case before this video? What aspect of this story shocked you most? And remember, stay aware. Stay safe. Trust your instincts. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person is the one nobody suspects. One final chilling detail. Before we go, there's one more thing you need to know, something that makes this case even more haunting. In 2005, after Dennis Rader's arrest, investigators began the heartbreaking task of returning personal items he'd stolen from his victims. Jewelry, clothing, photographs, items he'd kept as trophies for decades. One of those items was a small silver bracelet that had belonged to Josephine Otero, the 11-year-old girl murdered in 1974. For 31 years, while her family grieved and wondered, Dennis Rader had kept that bracelet in a hidden box. He would take it out, hold it, and relive the murder. When investigators finally returned the bracelet to Josephine's surviving siblings, Charlie Otero held it in his hands and wept. He remembered his little sister wearing it. He remembered her smile, her laugh, her dreams of growing up. All of that had been stolen by the man who lived just miles away, who passed by their family on the street, who existed in the same community, completely unsuspected for 3 decades. That bracelet, that small piece of silver that meant the world to a little girl, had been within reach the entire time. The killer had been within reach the entire time. But nobody knew. Nobody suspected. That's the true horror of BTK. Not just what he did, but how long he did it while hiding in plain sight. A reminder that we must stay vigilant, that we must protect each other, and that we must never forget the real victims of these crimes. The lives cut short. Let's end by honoring those who were taken too soon. Joseph Otero, age 38. A U.S. Air Force veteran who served his country with pride. A devoted father who worked hard to provide for his family. He died trying to protect them. Julie Otero, age 34. A loving mother whose entire world revolved around her children. She faced her killer with courage, begging for her children's lives until her last breath. Joseph Otero Jr., age 9. A little boy who loved baseball and dreamed of becoming a pilot like his dad. His life was just beginning. Josephine Otero, age 11. A bright, creative girl who loved music and art. She wanted to be a teacher. She never got the chance. Catherine Bright, age 21. A young woman full of hope and ambition, working hard and building her independence. She fought her killer with everything she had. Shirley Vian, age 24. A devoted mother of 3 who battled illness while caring for her children. Her last thoughts were for their safety. Nancy Fox, age 25. An independent woman building her career and life. She tried to reason with evil and paid the ultimate price. Maureen Hedge, age 53. A neighbor of Dennis Rader's. A grandmother who never knew the monster lived right next door. Vicki Wegerle, age 28. A talented artist and loving wife. For 18 years, her murder was unsolved, her husband suspected. She deserved better. Dolores Davis, age 62. A kind woman known for helping her neighbors and community. Her generosity was repaid with evil. These 10 souls. These 10 lives. These 10 futures erased. They're not just BTK victims, they were beloved family members, friends, neighbors, co-workers. They had favorite songs and foods. They had inside jokes and dreams for tomorrow. They had people who loved them desperately and missed them still. The ripple effect. And we must remember that BTK's victim count extends far beyond those 10 people. Charlie Otero, who found his family's bodies at age 15, carries that trauma every single day. He's now in his 60s, and he still has nightmares. His entire life trajectory was altered by what he saw that afternoon in January 1974. Carmen Otero, another surviving sibling, has spoken about living with survivor's guilt, wondering why she wasn't home that day, whether she could have done something, whether she should have been there. Kevin Bright survived his injuries but lost his beloved sister Catherine. He's lived for decades knowing he escaped while she didn't, replaying those terrible moments over and over, wondering what he could have done differently. The 3 young children of Shirley Vian, who were locked in a bathroom while their mother was murdered, grew up with that trauma embedded in their psyches. Imagine being told to stay in the bathroom, being told your mother would be fine, and then discovering her body. That's a wound that never fully heals. Paula Rader lived with a serial killer for 34 years and never knew. She shared a bed with him, raised children with him, built a life with him, all while he maintained his secret collection of murder trophies and stalked new potential victims. The betrayal, the horror, the violation of trust, it's beyond comprehension. The Rader children, now adults, lost not only their father but their entire sense of reality. Everything they knew about their family, their childhood, their father was revealed to be a lie. They've had to rebuild their identities from scratch, always carrying the burden of their father's crimes. This is the true legacy of serial killers. It's not the infamy they crave or the attention they seek. It's the concentric circles of pain that ripple outward from their crimes, touching hundreds of lives, causing suffering that echoes through generations. The warning signs that weren't. Looking back now, were there signs that Dennis Rader was dangerous? Investigators and psychologists have examined this question extensively. As a child, Rader tortured animals, a classic warning sign often seen in developing serial killers. But his family either didn't notice or didn't recognize the significance. As a young man, he was known for being odd, socially awkward, and overly interested in bondage and control. But none of that made him unique enough to stand out as dangerous. As an adult, he was controlling, rigid, and enjoyed exercising petty authority over others. But again, that described thousands of middle managers and small-town officials across America. The truth is that BTK was able to hide because we still don't fully understand what creates a serial killer or how to identify them before they act. Rader himself claimed he was born with his compulsions, that he was wired wrong from the beginning. But that's likely just another excuse, another way to absolve himself of responsibility for his choices. The modern legacy. The BTK case has become a crucial teaching tool in criminal justice programs, FBI training, and forensic psychology courses. It demonstrates several important principles. 1. Digital forensics can solve cases. The floppy disk metadata that led to Rader's capture was revolutionary at the time and paved the way for modern digital forensics. 2. DNA databases work. Even partial or familial DNA can identify suspects decades after crimes are committed. 3. Keeping cases open matters. The Wichita Police Department never closed the BTK investigation. They kept evidence, maintained files, and were ready when he resurfaced. 4. Psychological profiling has value. Understanding that BTK was a narcissist who craved attention allowed investigators to communicate with him strategically and ultimately manipulate him into revealing himself. 5. Serial killers can stop and start. The myth that serial killers always escalate until caught or killed was disproven by Rader's 25-year hiatus. The question we can't answer. One question haunts investigators, psychologists, and the public: could Dennis Rader have been stopped sooner? If someone had recognized the warning signs in his youth, could intervention have prevented him from becoming a killer? If he had been caught after the first murder, could 9 lives have been saved? If he hadn't been lied to about the floppy disk, would he have killed again? These are impossible questions. We can't rewrite history. We can only learn from it. What we do know is that the investigation was thorough, dedicated, and ultimately successful. The Wichita Police Department, particularly Lieutenant Ken Landwehr and his task force, spent decades on this case. They never gave up. They never stopped looking. And when BTK's ego brought him back into the open, they were ready. A note on true crime consumption. As we discuss cases like BTK, it's important to acknowledge something. True crime is entertainment for many of us, but it was real horror for the people who lived it. It's easy to get caught up in the puzzle-solving aspects, the psychology, the investigation techniques. But we must never forget that behind every case file is a real person whose life was taken, whose family was shattered, whose potential was stolen. The survivors and victims' families of BTK's crimes are still alive. They still carry this pain. When we discuss the case, when we analyze Rader's psychology, when we examine the investigation, we're discussing the worst moments of their lives. So we honor them by telling these stories responsibly, by remembering the victims as people first, and by focusing on justice rather than glorifying the killer. Dennis Rader wanted to be famous. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be discussed and studied and feared. Instead, let's remember the Otero family's love for each other. Catherine Bright's courage in fighting back. Shirley Vian's final act of protecting her children. Nancy Fox's independence and spirit. Maureen Hedges' kindness to her neighbors. Vicki Wegerle's artistic talents. Dolores Davis's generosity. Let's remember the investigators who never gave up. The forensic scientists who made breakthrough discoveries. The families who survived with grace and strength. The community that came together and healed. That's the legacy that matters. Not BTK. Not Dennis Rader. Not the attention he craved. Moving forward. If you've watched this video all the way to the end, thank you for taking this journey through one of the darkest cases in American criminal history. It's not easy to confront evil this profound, to really sit with the reality of what humans can do to each other. But there's value in understanding these cases. Not to glorify the killers, but to learn how to protect ourselves and our communities. To recognize warning signs. To support survivors. To advocate for justice. To remember victims. If you or someone you know has been affected by violent crime, please know that resources are available. The National Center for Victims of Crime, local victim advocacy groups, and trauma-informed therapists can provide support and guidance. And if you ever feel unsafe, if someone makes you uncomfortable, if something doesn't feel right, trust that instinct. The people closest to BTK's victims often felt something was off when he approached or interacted with them, but they ignored those feelings because he seemed so normal, so harmless. Your intuition exists for a reason. Listen to it. Final thoughts. Dennis Rader is now 79 years old. In his decades of imprisonment, he's become exactly what he always feared most, irrelevant. The world has moved on. New cases capture public attention. His name is becoming footnote in criminal history rather than the headline he craved. Meanwhile, the families of his victims continue their lives with resilience and strength. They've established memorials, advocacy organizations, and support networks. They've transformed their pain into purpose. Charlie Otero has become an advocate for victims' rights, speaking publicly about his experience and helping others navigate the aftermath of violent crime. Kevin Bright has worked to ensure his sister Catherine is remembered for her life, not just her death. The other families, though more private, have found their own paths to healing and meaning. This is how evil is truly defeated, not by catching the killer, though that matters, but by refusing to let the killer's actions define the future. By choosing life over death. Hope over despair. Community over isolation. The neighbor nobody suspected turned out to be the monster in disguise. But he was caught. He was stopped. And he'll never hurt anyone again. That's not the dramatic, thriller movie ending that Dennis Rader might have wanted. But it's the ending he deserves, locked away, forgotten, irrelevant, while the people he tried to destroy continue living, loving, and honoring those who were lost. Thank you for watching. Remember to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and check out our other deep dive true crime cases where we always prioritize the victim's stories and the pursuit of justice. Stay safe out there. Look out for each other. And never forget, the most ordinary looking person can sometimes be hiding the darkest secrets. Until next time.